Hey there Cosmic Warriors, and welcome back to another video. Okay, so in today's video we are going to be taking a look at when you'll buy a house or when you will relocate or move house according to astrology. However, before we do dive into today's video, certainly make sure that you give this video a like if you like it today. Also make sure to subscribe if you have not already, and to of course click that little bell icon so that you can keep yourself updated with further content from myself. And one more quick thing to mention, and that is that I have some merchandise pieces there available. So if you are interested, then go to the links in the description box below. Okay, so with all of those introductions out of the way, let's do this. Okay, so I made a video about how to find things like property and real estate and housing using astrology, but in this video we'll be addressing when you may buy a house, well, aka get a mortgage, or when you may move house, which, yes, renting fits into this in case you were wondering. But before we do jump into these specific indicators, take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. And remember also that this is my own analysis, but as always, feel free to add to the discussion in the comment section there as well. And also make sure that you are considering your individual birth chart. So with that being said, you're going to need a copy of your transits and your progressions along with your solar return chart. Now, I've made a video all about how you can find these things along with what they mean. So make sure that you do watch that video and then come back here. But if you are already up to speed with transits and progressions and solar returns, then let's start by looking towards the fourth house. And this is because the fourth house rules over our home/living situation within astrology. So therefore, some placements to consider or some placements to look out for when it comes to relocating or moving house include a fourth house north node transit, as well as a fourth house north node solar return year. Now, this change in location might be a way of you doing something just out of your comfort zone, and it may also challenge your career/professional life as well. So in this respect, perhaps this is a time when you really start to think about your living situation in combination with your profession. Or perhaps this suggests the easing up on your professional life for a little while as you start to focus more on your home life. Maybe by relocating to a different area, you discover that there's some changes to be made within that professional landscape. Though essentially, these fourth house north node activations can suggest a new living situation that may even feel like fate, like destiny. But some other indicators of relocating or moving are a fourth house Jupiter transit, as well as a fourth house Jupiter solar return year. Now, this change in location can suggest moving overseas or moving to a different country to live in, or it can suggest moving across the country that you currently live in. Basically, there's a greater distance of movement when it comes to Jupiter. And this is quite interesting because I moved house during a fourth house Jupiter transit in 2019. And I also have a friend who moved house and actually bought her very first house during a 4th house Jupiter solar return year. And what's further interesting about my friend's experience is that Jupiter, Venus, Moon, and Mercury were all in her 4th house during that specific solar return year. Just following on from this point, a 4th house Venus placement or activation can be an indicator of actually buying a house. It can suggest investing in property. It can suggest purchasing land. But then likewise, my friend's husband, he was also experiencing a moon in Libra in the 4th house solar return year, which again, with that Venus influence, okay, of course, Venus rules over Libra within astrology. With that Venus influence, it can suggest the purchasing of a home, especially purchasing a home with a spouse or with a significant other. And it was that same year that my friend and her husband got married. So I suppose with that Venus energy being mentioned, some indicators of actually buying a house or getting a mortgage include a 4th house Venus solar return year, or a 4th house Venus progression, or a 4th house Venus transit. And these placements might suggest buying a house with another person specifically. But then some other indicators of actually buying a house or getting a mortgage include a 2nd house Venus transit, or a 2nd house Venus progression, or a 2nd house Venus solar return year. Though seeing as we're on the subject of the 2nd house, some other indicators of relocating or moving house include a 2nd house North Node transit, as well as a 2nd house North Node solar return year. Likewise, looking at a 2nd house Mercury transit, or a 2nd house Mercury progression, or a 2nd house Mercury solar return year. Though keep in mind when it comes to the 2nd house that it rules over things like our money and our assets. It looks at the finances and materials that we own, and it also looks at our physical security. Therefore, during these 2nd house activations, maybe they suggest a time period where we have built up enough money or enough wealth in order to get a mortgage so that we can indeed buy a home. Then again, these activations can suggest you being able to buy a house outright. But on the other hand, perhaps a 2nd house Jupiter activation is more evident of buying a house outright. So looking at you landing yourself into a large sum of money, for example. Though in this respect, look out for a 2nd house Jupiter transit, or for a 2nd house Jupiter solar return year when it comes to things like relocating or moving or buying a house. However, what I also feel the need to mention is just to keep in mind, of course, planets collectively being in those 4th houses, well, 4th and 2nd houses. Also remember the ruler or the rulers of these houses in your chart, along with aspects. Because for example, you might be experiencing a 2nd house Jupiter in Aquarius transit, but you've got Uranus and Taurus making a really difficult aspect to your Mercury or to your Saturn or to your Neptune. Or maybe that Jupiter in Aquarius in the 2nd house is opposing planets that you have already in the 8th house, suggesting some conflict over financial matters with your partner or with your spouse. Or maybe it suggests some things to clean up when it comes to any debts you have before you think about applying to buy a house. Though speaking of the 8th house, I suppose that's another house to consider when it comes to property and housing. Therefore, some other indicators of moving house or buying a house include an 8th house North Node transit, or an 8th house North Node solar return year. Likewise, looking at an 8th house Venus transit, or an 8th house Venus progression, or an 8th house solar return year. Furthermore, looking at that 8th house Jupiter transit, or at an 8th house Jupiter solar return year. However, the thing about the 8th house is that it's associated with our shared resources and finances. So this idea of partnering up with another person as we share our money and materials. Meaning that these 8th house activations align with marriage. They can align with marriage, where the two parties that are involved are purchasing a home together under both parties' names. Then again, these 8th house activations may also be representative of an inheritance of some kind. So this could be the likes of a loved one dying and then they leave you the home in your name. Or this may also be representative of you and your significant other having a baby together, resulting in you and this other person moving in together, which again is another form of relocating or moving house. However, in the case of the 8th house Venus activation, perhaps this pertains more so to marriage or unionship. But then in the case of the 8th house Jupiter activation, perhaps this pertains to a large fortune or to an inheritance. Then again, maybe an 8th house moon activation pertains to a family inheritance as well. Therefore, on this note, some other property and housing indicators actually include an 8th house moon progression or an 8th house solar return year. Now, similar to what I said about the 2nd and 4th houses, make sure you consider planets already located in your 8th house, and also remember to locate your 8th house ruler or rulers, as well as aspects, of course. Because, for example, if you already have Moon and Jupiter in the 8th house natally, this might suggest a stronger emphasis on receiving an inheritance or on coming into big gains through somebody else, resulting in you being able to purchase a house, for example. But then if you have Pluto and Saturn in Capricorn in the solar return chart, along with really, really difficult aspects, then maybe this suggests some trial and error and limitations when it comes to such things. Though on that note, another thing that I think is important to mention is that, well, I understand how difficult it can be to get on the property ladder, how difficult it can be to buy a house or to get a mortgage. And also, I noticed today that so many people are renting instead of buying a house. Maybe you're someone who is even saving at the moment for a mortgage, but you're renting in the meantime. So in this respect, everybody's situations and circumstances are different. So when looking at these relocating / moving house indicators, just also keep in mind that rental side of things, Even take myself as an example, right? I've moved house at least 4 times in the last 3 years. 4 times. And they are all rental properties. Though, to be fair, I do have Sagittarius ruling my 4th house natally. So in my case, there's already those indicators of traveling, branching out more, relocating. It's these things that are already there natally in the chart. But then take someone like my mom, who has Capricorn ruling the 4th house within her natal chart. And I'm pretty sure she grew up in the same house that she raised her 6 children in. That house has been there for a very long time, let me tell you that much. And so therefore, what I'm trying to get to is that it's good to consider those natal placements as well. It's good to consider the individual chart. It's really important to do that in order to grasp the bigger picture. Still, however, what I'm also trying to say is that I've relocated many times and it's my chart, along with transits and progressions and solar returns, that reflect this pretty well. Though I suppose this leads me on to another area to look at when it comes to relocating and moving house, and that's actually the third house. Why, you may ask? Well, because this area of life reflects our local neighborhood and our local city. And so therefore, third house activations may suggest this notion of moving around one's local neighborhood or city. So in my case, for example, back in 2018, I moved house within my home city of Belfast, and during that solar return year, I had Venus, Sun, and Mercury all in Aquarius in the third house. But then on that note, some indicators of relocating more locally, more short distance, include things like a third house Venus transit, or a third house Venus progression, or a third house Venus solar return year. Also looking at a third house Mercury transit, or a third house Mercury progression, or a third house Mercury solar return year. Plus, also keep an eye out for a third house moon progression along with a third house moon solar return year. Yeah, that third house moon activation can suggest a moving back in with the family dynamic or moving because of family matters. Likewise, a fourth house moon activation can also suggest these things. Which, by the way, some other indicators of relocating or moving house are a fourth house moon progression along with a fourth house moon solar return year. Now, I would also say that if Pluto or Uranus are activating those fourth, second, eighth, and third houses for you, then perhaps these are other indicators of moving or relocating. But perhaps the relocating that comes with such placements doesn't feel the most settling or comfortable. Yeah, with the Pluto or the Uranus activations, it can feel like a tornado. It can feel stressful and quite scary, daunting. And there might also be a part of it that resists, well, a part of you, I suppose, that resists the change. Perhaps these placements, they represent even outside of our control events that come about that then force us to move location, such as getting away from a toxic situation or breaking free from suppression, or being told you can't live here anymore, resulting in our very survival being threatened. Hope you can see from what I've said that Uranus and Pluto, they bring about an evolutionary or a transformative change. And so when activating these particular houses that I've talked about today, our living situations and or our financial situations can change drastically or abruptly. Though the last thing that I just want to touch on here is really the importance at looking at transits and progressions and solar returns collectively. So looking at them all together along with your natal birth chart, because the more connections you spot between these things, the more potent moving or relocating may be. So for example, during 2019, like I said, I relocated, and during this time, not only was I experiencing a fourth house Jupiter transit, I was also experiencing a fourth house North Node solar return year, therefore adding to the potency, adding to the likelihood. And then in my natal chart, as I said as well, I have Sagittarius ruling the fourth house, But then I've got Jupiter, the ruler of Sagittarius, the ruler of my 4th house. I've got Jupiter conjunct my ascendant, which again only adds to the potency of moving and relocating. Okay then, Cosmic Warriors, so that concludes my video on when you will buy a house or when you will relocate, when you will move house, according to astrology. Now, if you do happen to have any thoughts and opinions on today's video, then certainly make sure that you add your opinions and your thoughts in the comment section down below. I would love to hear your feedback. But with all of that being said, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for subscribing. And of course, if you would like to see more videos from myself and you have not yet subscribed, then make sure that you click that subscribe button and also make sure that you give this video a like, remember. And I will be back with another video very, very soon. Bye!